Hello, my name is Pat McKee. I will be presenting Optimizing Resilience with the Bio-Occupational Approach, illustrated by client stories. I'd like to thank COTEC-ENOTHE Scientific Committee for inviting me to present this keynote address at the conference. Although this is a pre-recorded keynote address, there will be a live question and answer session at the end. I'm an Associate Professor Emeritus with the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at the University of Toronto, and I'm co-founder of Anatomy Software International. After this presentation, there will be a follow-up workshop titled Time for a New Paradigm. Has the time come to embrace both occupational and biological foci in occupational therapy? So if you're intrigued by this topic and you'd like to be part of the conversation, please join me and Lucille and Barbara. So for more than 40 years, I've been teaching at university settings. I've co-authored an orthotics textbook and book chapters, and I'm co-developer of the Anatomy Glove Learning System, educational media used by hand therapists and university instructors in over 30 countries around the world. I've been drawing attention to occupation for hand therapy audiences for some time. Because in Canada and the United States, about 90% of hand therapists are occupational therapists. Yet I've observed that they may not pay enough attention to the occupational needs and goals of their clients. In contrast, sitting around the table with other academics, I've observed that knowledge of the human body, let's call that biology, does not seem to be valued as much as it used to be. I believe the time has come to draw attention again to the importance of biology for the OT profession. To make this argument, I would like to tell you some stories, beginning with Shelley Gauthier, a Paralympian who recently returned from competing in Tokyo. Shelley's story illustrates how advancing her occupational dream to be a Paralympian required and continues to require a bio-occupational approach. Let me tell you about Shelley. Her story begins 20 years ago. She was an avid mountain biker, and I knew her when she was working as a physical therapist in a hand therapy program in Toronto. In 2001, she was injured in a mountain biking accident at the age of 32, sustained severe head injury despite wearing a helmet, and was in a coma for 6 weeks. She was discharged after several months in rehabilitation. She had mild cognitive impairment, spastic right-sided hemiplegia, and dysarthria. Her cognition and speech has improved steadily, but she has been unable to return to her PT profession. For several years, though, she was an anatomy lab demonstrator for occupational therapy students. I'd like you to see her walk so you can see how difficult and slow it is for her to walk. Now, since this video was taken, Shelley has been to an orthotist who made her a custom ankle-foot orthosis that she uses for walking. Shelley returned to cycling within 1 year of her accident, and she was riding a recumbent tricycle, with most of the power coming from her left unaffected lower extremity, and this was her preferred method of transportation around Toronto. You can see that she's wearing an ankle-foot orthosis made by the orthotist. She uses a hiking stick to help her walk, which you saw in the previous video. Now, Shelley has no active finger flexion, so I made her a custom-made grip assist made from neoprene fabric with a hook and loop strap. In this way, she was able to keep her hand attached to the handlebar. And she was able to continue a healthy, active lifestyle, fulfill her passion to cycle, and return to a convenient and pleasurable form of transportation and exercise. Beginning in 2008, she started to race. She acquired a custom-made three-wheeled racer, and she began to aspire to be a Paralympian at the 2012 Paralympics in London. Through her training, her coach observed that she had a spastic flexed wrist, and he wanted that wrist to be positioned in the same degree of extension as her unaffected wrist to improve her upper arm comfort, body alignment, and propulsion of her legs. So I invited Shelley to meet me in the orthotic lab at the University of Toronto, and her flexed wrist position, which you see here, was corrected by molding a low temperature thermoplastic orthosis. I made it on her while she was seated on her bike with the degree of wrist extension that was desirable. And I had her tested around the university halls with her three-wheel trike where we identified pressure points that needed to be relieved. The orthosis was dorsal forearm based. It had a palmar hand support which was bonded to that base. It was molded in two pieces. So you can see Shelley wearing the orthosis on her right hand, and it really improved her body alignment. It eliminated pain and improved the ability of her right affected extremity to propel herself on the bicycle. An additional unexpected benefit was that she found she was able to use her affected arm to help her steer. She began to ride faster, and she qualified for competitive international events. However, the low temperature orthosis was susceptible to ultraviolet light degradation, and she was wearing it outdoors for many hours at a time. So that caused it to crack and it needed frequent repairs. As the 2012 Paralympics were approaching, I suggested that we visit her orthotist and that he make her a high temperature orthosis. He said he could not make it in his usual way because he could not mold on Shelley's arm when she was on her bike with the methods that he uses. However, he was able to make a cast from the low temperature orthosis that I had made her. As a result, she competed in the 2012, 2016, and 2020 Paralympics, also numerous World Cups and World Championships. Here we see the high temperature orthosis, and I'm going to show you how she applies it, how she uses leverage to leverage her wrist into an extended wrist position. This was the orthosis made by her orthotist, which was molded from a cast of the low temperature orthosis that I had made her. It has a very long lever arm. For anybody who is an orthotic fabricator, you might think, wow, that's too long. But in fact, she doesn't need to flex her elbow, so we could get longer length to better control her wrist position. So this orthosis, as I mentioned and you saw, leveraged her wrist into extension. And here we're going to see what Shelley, or hear what Shelley has to say about her wrist brace.
The brace that I wear on my wrist allows me to steer with my right hand. So I'm a two-handed person on the trike. It's really nice because other people have their hand strapped up inside their cycling shirts. So then they have only one hand to use on the trike. And with me, I have two hands on the trike, and that really makes me feel safer, and it stabilizes me on the handlebars of the trike. And so the grace of riding is made better by the brace.
So you can see here a different orthosis. Actually, now she's wearing 3D printed orthoses on her arm and leg. So there continue to be innovations in the design, but bear in mind that the hand orthosis that she uses is the original design that I made her. So here we have a 3-minute video that if you're watching live, you're going to see the whole 3 minutes. Now, if you're watching recording, of course, you can fast forward if you wish, but this was recorded from the Paralympics in August of just this year of 2021.
Tokyo 2020, the Paralympics, the venue, the Fuji International Speedway, and it is our women's tricycle in the T1, T2. So athletes that are whose impairment affects their balance, and thus the tricycle, which are very high-tech machines in their own right. As we have a look at the Canadian here, Shelley Gaultier, who is a T1, so her time will be factored on that mathematical formula there on the right-hand side compared to those athletes in the T2. Shelley Gaultier, 373. And just to give you a little bit more background on Shelley, she's 52 years of age, from Niagara Falls, Ontario, resides these days in Canada. And before her accident, she was a competitive mountain bike racer and practicing physiotherapist.
Yeah, it's Shelley Gaultier from Canada. And she's out there and she's doing it. She's racing at the Paralympics, Tokyo. Look ahead. Keep the head up. First thing you do when you're tired is drop the head. She's got that aero helmet. It's more aero when she's looking up. Look up, look up. Push, push, push. She's getting the instructions from the coach behind. She's absolutely exhausted.
And there you go, great instruction, right turn.
Oh, great encouragement from the coach there. It's a very difficult thing to be able to do.
Let's have a look at that time of 41 minutes. And so there we go, 5 minutes back on our race winner, but boy, certainly a great achievement from Shelley Gaultier, who is 52 years of age, originally from Niagara Falls, these days living in Toronto, Ontario.
The coach has just told her that she can stop now.
Confirm those results for you. So Jana Majunke of Germany, the gold medal. Carol Cook, the veteran, the silver. Angelika Droeck-Kaiser of Germany, the bronze medalist. So Germany will have representation twice on the podium. Monica Sarita there of the United States, finishing in 7th. A really gutsy performance too from Shelley Gaultier there in 8th, as was the case with all of our riders in this particular women's class, the T1 and T2 time trial. We will.
So you can appreciate the challenge it is for Shelley to be an athlete, a Paralympian, and you can see also that as she was riding through the race, she had her coach behind her. Because of her cognitive challenges, she has him telling her when to turn, when to slow down, telling her that she's finished her race. That time trial was 16 kilometers long, which she did in 41 minutes. You can see the amount of effort that was required, how tired she got. It was very hot in Tokyo when that was occurring. But she is a committed athlete, and she is a very impressive young woman. She is an 18-time world champion in addition to her competition at the Paralympics, and she is classified as a T1 cyclist, which means she has cognitive difficulties. And if you recall, she came in 8th in that race, but she was competing against T2 paracyclists who have a lesser degree of disability. Now let's talk about occupational therapy before we listen to some more client stories. The occupational therapy paradigm has swung back and forth like a pendulum. The biological pendulum, which emerged in the probably 1930s, is the oft maligned bottom-up approach, especially now when the occupational paradigm is more prominent. The occupational or top-down paradigm is the one that aligns with the title of our profession, occupational therapy. And this, as we see, is a picture from about 1918, where an occupational therapist that was then called a ward aide was helping an injured soldier who had returned from World War I. So occupation, the doing, is the source of our name occupational therapy, which began in the early 1900s. After World War I, the biological paradigm began to emerge. And this is where there was discussion of performance components. It was aligned with the medical model. But then, in about the 1990s, we see a return to a focus on occupation. There's discord because of this pendulum shift. So I question, where is our profession today? It depends on where you work. It depends on where you graduated from and when you graduated. Do you see occupational therapy as largely occupation focused or biologically focused, or do you see both? Why not both? This will be discussed in our following workshop. The occupational focus provides essential occupational perspective, considers the complete client picture, environment, occupational designs, cognition, affect, and physical attributes, thus addressing clients' unique occupational performance issues. Notice that in this photo, the background is in focus, while the forearm is not focused. The biological focus addresses the biological or physical origins of occupational impairment, providing a view and an understanding of how current and potential biological factors impact occupational performance. To get the foreground in focus, we use our biological lens. So the bio-occupational approach alternates focus between the foreground, which is biology, and the background, which is occupation. As your eyes are shifting from the left side, which is foreground focused, to the right side, which is background focused, that is the metaphor of this bio-occupational approach. Each client has occupational and biological goals. There are a lot of people on Shelley's team to help her achieve her occupational goals. The OT contribution was and continues to be essential. Unless we address the biological goals, how are OTs different from social workers? Let me tell you another story about Catherine Wilson. Catherine's 20-year career as a professional concert pianist was in serious jeopardy when sudden onset of pain and immobility in her right thumb due to osteoarthritis led to an immediate halt to her piano playing. This is where her arthritis lay, at the base of her thumb, at the carpal metacarpal joint. This is a photo of Catherine performing at Carnegie Hall, and I've been helping her for 15 years wearing the orthosis that you see here. It is made from neoprene with bonded thermoplastic, and it provides sufficient joint stabilization to allow her pain-free piano playing and also a suitable appearance for public performance. As a result, she was able to continue her pursuit of her livelihood and passion as a concert pianist. In her own words, she says, "My hands are my life. I'm so grateful to my therapist for listening to what I wanted and needed. Without these orthoses, my career would have been over. I call them my friends. They enable me to continue performing at the highest technical level." Let us hear her play. So you can see Catherine is yet another example of how the biooccupational approach was essential to her achieving her goals. One final story, Samuel. And I'm going to use this story to illustrate 6 guiding principles of a biooccupational model that was originally developed with respect to orthotic intervention. The first principle is to ensure client-centeredness. This story, Samuel, is about a 5-year-old boy with bilateral thumb interphalangeal joint hypermobility, causing subluxation with pinching. His parents were concerned about his handwriting skills. Samuel wanted to play electronic games. The second principle is to identify and address biological goals and minimize biological harm. We could see that Samuel was avoiding use of his thumb distal phalanx during prehensile activities. His thumb interphalangeal joints hyperextended when pinching or touching objects. He had difficulty activating thumb interphalangeal joint motion even when the metacarpal phalangeal joint was blocked, and he had hypersensitivity of the thumb distal phalanges. The third principle is to identify and address occupational goals. Occupational performance issues identified by Samuel and his parents related to managing buttons and zippers, playing electronic games, and acquisition of handwriting skills. The fourth principle applies sound design and fabrication guidelines. We used fairly thin thermoplastic with foam lining to create a comfortable orthosis that he could wear. Fifth principle, optimize usability. And you can see by the discoloration of the thermoplastic, he is using these orthoses. These orthoses controlled the position of his thumb interphalangeal joints, which encouraged activation of the flexor pollicis longus tendons for prehensile activities such as playing electronic games and printing. He wore these orthoses for all functional activities. At 1 month, he had become independent in dressing with zippered garments. His printing skills improved, the movement pattern for prehension, trip, pinch normalized, and he began to use the pulp of his distal phalanx when pinching. The sixth principle, meet professional practice standards. Monitoring and modifying the orthosis was an ongoing process. And at 10 months, he was graduated from his custom-made thermoplastic to an off-the-shelf prefabricated oval 8 orthosis. At 14 months, orthotic intervention was discontinued. We attribute this to neuroplasticity because he learned to activate his flexor pollicis longus tendons, and he was no longer hypersensitive over his distal phalanx. He was able to stabilize his interphalangeal joints during resisted prehensile tasks using normal movement patterns. His thumb joint hypermobility, although still present bilaterally, ceased to be an occupational performance issue for Samuel. you need a dual focus. You may be aware that there are many occupational therapy podcasts, and one of those podcasts is called Occupied. I happened to come across this podcast and was interested to see that an occupational therapist by the name of Liz Townsend, who I know quite well, was interviewed on one of these podcasts, and I listened to this recording, which led me to reach out to her to have a conversation with her. Elizabeth Townsend is well known for her work around occupation, around enabling occupation. For example, in this publication called Enabling Occupation 2. So I was very interested when I heard her interview on the podcast Occupied, and I wanted to learn more about her perspectives. What I heard from Elizabeth when I reached out to her was this. In her opinion, the knowledge of the body is incredibly useful. I hope that OTs maintain knowledge of the body. I know that some programs do not teach anatomy or physiology anymore. Occupation without biology leaves a gap in understanding the occupational perspective. It would be great to figure out who we are and why we are not properly recognized. So in conclusion, biooccupational principles and an explicit dual focus guide therapists through a holistic, client-centered professional practice process that considers personal attributes and unique environmental contexts to address biological and occupational goals. Thank you. Now stay tuned, because after the question period, there will be a workshop entitled Time for a New Paradigm. Has the time come to embrace both occupational and biological foci in occupational therapy? That workshop occurs at 16:45 p.m. Thank you. And now to the questions and hopefully some answers.